Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of Telemedia in 10 video casts with me, Jarvis, Todd, the publisher of Telemedia magazine, and him, Paul Skeldon, our esteemed editor and wordsmith, and the beard behind all things Telemedia. And as usual, if you've been tuning into these updates, we spend 10 minutes, hopefully, whistling through some of the hottest topics in the world of Telemedia. That's anything to do with mobile payments, engagement, messaging, value-added services, and all the things that people out there are using their phones for in a premium way. So without further ado, hello, mate. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very excited, and you know why, Paul? Because we're live.
We are live. We are live to the world. The whole world is probably watching.
Millions of people are able to see, just to feel the energy of our live performance. So, without further ado, it's been an interesting week, and
as ever.
As ever. And we're going to kick off with well, you choose Phonics or Docomo.
Well, I think there's two things happened that we reported on about Phonics and about Docomo. But Phonics, our friends at Phonics, are floating on the London Stock Exchange, on the AIM Techie Exchange, which is, I think, really big and significant news because we've known those guys for many years through many different name changes of the company and everything. But suddenly they're floating on the stock exchange, which is that's a big deal. I think that's a really sort of mainstream sort of move, and it shows just where we've got to with particularly carrier billing, but also the sort of carrier billing messaging tie-up. The other thing that's interesting about why I brought in Docomo into this as well is that around the same time, almost exactly the same, it's on the same day, they announced the appointment of Jonathan Bennett. Now, in itself, not a massive deal. Sorry, Jonathan, if you're listening. But what was interesting about it is there
goes a listener.
Well, I hope he is listening. But shout out to you, Jonathan. Congratulations on your new job. But what's really interesting about it is he's been brought in to, in the words of Docomo, liaise with fintechs, so with banks and other sort of quasi banks and fintech companies. And I think together these two stories show just how the kind of, well, certainly carrier billing in the case of Phonics, but sort of carrier billing and alternative forms of billing, particularly mobile payments, are now really mainstream. Suddenly, this is a big deal. Docomo have got someone who's liaising with the banks about how these services can be rolled out to being used in all sorts of ways. I think that's really significant. I think that sort of marks a real shift in where the kind of companies that we've dealt with and covered for so many years sit in the sort of financial technology world. They've gone up a gear, in my humble opinion.
Well, I know, and I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I always feel a little bit slightly bored when news comes out of an appointment of some sort. And I know we tend to shy away from that because it does tend to be sort of a little bit of puff on behalf of whichever company happens to be making that announcement. But you're quite right, Paul, because Jonathan comes from a very traditional digital payments background, including American Express, Travelex, and MasterCard. And quite often, one of the common themes that we talk about with regards to DCB is, is it mainstream? How can we make it more mainstream? How can we get consumers to sort of embrace it as being as ubiquitous as the phone that's in their hands? And I think that somebody with that kind of expertise would surely be a great driving force. I think Docomo in general will be a great driving force behind making and helping cement DCB in the sort of psyche of our consumers. So yeah, I agree. I think it was well worth pointing out. Well done, Jonathan. I hope he's logged back in. And yeah, I think all round good news. But as I say, especially if you can harness the experiences that he's had with some of those other payment giants. My comment on Phonics, and I agree, it's very exciting for the guys, and congratulations. I did a little bit of research last night to see how their first day of trading went. Did you buy a 5% stake in the company, Paul, or a 10%? What did you go for in the end?
Well, I can't reveal that sort of information, and also I'm very dubious about whether that might be insider dealing. But do tell how my shares may or may not be doing.
Well, I can tell you that. I can tell you on the first day of trading, Rob Feast and the boys and girls down there at Phonics raised a whopping 45 million quid.
Wow. Drinks on Rob then when we come once again mixed.
Yeah, and I also thought to myself, well, now, I mean, that's a lot of that's going to go into their marketing budget and their comms budget. So I thought,
Yeah.
if you're a freelance writer of some sort, I mean, there's give us a call.
Absolutely, absolutely. If they need any help.
Advertising in Telemedia magazine, I mean, so it's going to be very exciting to see what their plans are with regards to this. I mean, sure.
I think so, yeah.
This is part of an expansion strategy, and it'd be very interesting to see how they spend the money.
Well, quite. That was what the point I was going to bring up, is that it'd be interesting to see what they do with the money that this will raise for them. And you say, $40-odd million pounds, dollars, either way, a lot of money. What they do with that, not just in terms of marketing and promotion, through Telemedia magazine, who I'm sure will get the lion's share of it, but also how they sort of use that to help drive maybe sort of increased uptake amongst consumers, and which markets they expand into. Really interesting times. Great news, I think. Really, yes, strangely exciting for a stock market float, and a people appointment store, a couple of stories.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also just to pick up again on that sort of mainstream, driving DCB into the mainstream type of theme. I mean, whenever we mention phonics, it always tends to be with a remarkably mainstream brand. We've had the Fishing TV. I think last week we had the National Trust. And again, with that kind of finance behind it, with the sort of ethos that a company like that's got, that can only be good for the industry as a whole. And I think, gaining consumer trust, widening awareness will, I think, ultimately pay dividends for us all. Absolutely.
And let's not forget Hannah Giles, who does their marketing, is off to have a baby. So congratulations to her.
Indeed. So from babies to apps, or apps for babies. Some news from Annie this week, some quite interesting numbers that I think you picked up on.
Yes, they've done, as they do sort of every quarter, sort of an analysis of app usage, spending in apps and that sort of thing, and found, perhaps unsurprisingly, that in Q3, so that's sort of July, August, September, globally, 25% more time was spent by consumers using apps, topping out at 180 billion hours in September. Which is huge. People are clearly turning more and more to apps for entertainment, but that also leads to them spending money, and a lot of their figures sort of hint at where this is sort of going and how lucrative potentially it is. 33 billion new apps downloaded, 10% growth in Google Play downloads, 20% for iOS. It's all up. Most of them games, entertainment, and tools, which are scratching the surface. That's sort of productivity tools and video conferencing tools. So it's not just consumer spend, it's this sort of quasi working from home consumer spend on trying to make communications and work, particularly remotely, work better. And it's just leading to sort of massive uptick in spending. Consumers spent $28 billion in apps globally in Q3. Which is a vast amount of money, and from our point of view, I guess it is one of the areas where we're going to see carrier billing start to take off, because not everybody has the sort of access to the payment tools in apps globally that we tend to have in developed countries. In developing nations, it's going to be done through things like carrier billing and IPRN and all that sort of thing. So I think they painted a lovely picture of the fact that things are on the up, certainly in the app economy, with people spending money in apps, in games, in social media. So all good news there.
Well, I agree. And I mean, I think it's quite interesting. You referenced the IPRN side of things. And I was watching one of the presentations from Quack. It's on the 8.1 platform. And they do, and in fact, not just them, but also audiotext.com, who we talked about last week, all reference the sort of fragmentation of the media market, and how in emerging markets, these kind of payment mechanisms can really help those new broadcasters, if you like, or new media companies or new content owners monetize what they do. And that sort of essence of the fragmentation of a media market, I think, is really summed up in this particular story. Because whilst I haven't furnished myself with the figures, I was rather hoping you might be able to, but when they quote 180 billion hours each month of people using and viewing an app, I just can't imagine. I mean, that surely must. I don't know, how does that compare with, you know, your mainstream media? I would have thought it's absolutely obliterated mainstream media figures, right?
I think it does. Yes, I mean, if you sort of just even do a sort of thumb in the air calculation, if you say 7 billion people in the world, that's if you divide 180 by 7, you still get. I can't do the maths off the top of my head, but you get a really large number still. So each, you know, if that's every single human being doing something, they're spending quite a few hours, you know, doing it. And yet I don't have any comparative figures. It's hard to nail down, funnily enough. But yes, you would think that this sort of app usage is, yes, as you say, obliterating the use of all other kinds of media. I think, you know, you've got to factor into that it's not just media and entertainment consumption. It is sort of productivity and work and things like that as well. But by far the lion's share, certainly of the spending, is going into games and entertainment. And you know, it's clear that this is how people now turn to entertainment. And as you say, quite rightly, it is an excellent presentation actually on Telemedia 8.1 about IPRN, because it just really does show how it's become something that is once again really, really important to the developing economies. It's their way in to this sort of world for consumers. So yeah, excellent and interesting stuff.
Well, I agree. I mean, we might as well just touch on that. If anyone hasn't been to the Telemedia 8.1 platform, why not? It's free to register and subscribe in October. Things may change in November, so get in quick, get your profiles activated, and there you will find an ever-growing library of some of the most succinct, accurate, valuable presentations covering all aspects of the telemedia market, right the way from network issues right the way down to acquisition and content. And this particular presentation we're talking about is called Building Your IPRN Business, hosted by Quack. And yeah, as Paul rightly says, I mean, just moving off into this sort of idea of media fragmentation, where is billing like IPRM really coming to the fore, and things like hotlines, app developers, as we've just touched on, YouTube channels, radio stations, websites, and traffic dealers. So, you know, loads of opportunities. And as you just rightly said, Paul, in emerging markets where people don't have access to banking infrastructure and they don't have credit cards, you know, our industry is just absolutely coming to the fore here and enabling this new generation of content providers and media companies to monetize what they do in some markets where there are some extremely exciting figures.
Oh, absolutely. And the 8.1 platform, it's really interesting because I started watching one of the presentations, which was about how global radio is using mobile to engage people, and it made me sort of think about, well, how do you do this outside of the developed world, which took me to looking at the Quack presentation about IPRN, because they outlined some really interesting things there. So you think sort of between just those two presentations, I learned quite a lot. And I think if you go, you know, it's brilliant. You know, there's some really interesting stuff up there, and it keep, you know, there's more still to come. So yeah, well worth checking out.
What I think is also, you know, interesting across comparing developed markets with emerging markets was that it is interesting that there are a lot of the same drivers, though, aren't there? So, you know, gaming continually comes up, video continually comes up. I mean, as you just mentioned there, radio interactivity continues. So, you know, it's almost as though, you know, whilst it is important to know that, you know your market and know local issues within markets. Right now, it does seem to be that there's a suite of absolutely red hot applications that people are willing to pay for on their phones, and it almost doesn't matter whether you're in a market where, you know, there's no DCB or sorry, a market where there's no banking, or a market where there's, you know, a very established infrastructure. It seems as though, you know, human beings ultimately do all seem to want pretty much the same sorts of things on their phones, albeit with probably, you know, local bias attached or cultural bias attached.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, people want the same thing. It doesn't matter sort of where they live. They want to be entertained. I think this is the reason that suddenly we're finding so much mainstream interest in carrier billing and IPRN around charging for these things, because the likes of Netflix and Spotify and all these massive brands realize that there's millions, literally, you know, tens, hundreds of millions of people in all these other countries who also want to stream music and watch great TV content, phone into radio quizzes, all that sort of stuff, and they need a way to monetize it. These are the tools to do it. So yeah, it's it's the democratization of entertainment, and we have the billing tools to make that happen.
Well, on that note, with the wonderful words like democratization being used, I mean, clearly you are inspired and filled with the Telemedia spirit, and you need to go and write something.
I will do. I will do.
Thank you very much, mate. Excellent.
You too, mate.
I wish I could spend more than 10 minutes with you every 2 weeks. It just doesn't seem enough somehow.
Well, no, maybe we should amend that. Maybe we should do it more frequently.
Let's do another. So until next time, I'm going to head off to the telemedia8.1.com platform to get myself right up to date, because I know there's still loads of great content that I haven't seen yet. And maybe, Paul, maybe in the near future, we'll be talking a little bit more about it. So until next time.
Take care, mate. Stay well. Good to see you. See you soon.
And goodbye, everybody.
Yes, of course. Goodbye to our live audience. We're YouTubers now, Jarvis.